I used to believe that love, once faded, could be stitched back together if I just held the thread tight enough. The gravel cracked gently beneath our shoes as Harold and I strolled through Zilker Park. Around us, laughter bloomed in waves, children darting between trees, couples whispering secrets over picnic blankets, dogs bounding after tossed frisbees. Life happened all around us, vivid and loud. But we walked in silence, as though we were ghosts passing through a world that no longer remembered our names. I glanced at him, my husband of 42 years. The sun caught the rim of his glasses. His face, marked by years of patience and habit, didn't turn toward mine. "You know, Harold," my voice came softer than I meant it to. "Maybe we could try something new." He didn't look up. New like what? I swallowed, fingers clenching the strap of my purse. Just something to help. I read about this supplement that might well help with energy for both of us. That made him pause slowly. His gaze met mine. There was no warmth in it, just the dull glint of a man tired of being reminded he should try. "You've been reading those magazines again." I smiled, but it cracked at the corners. Not just magazines. They're science. And besides, Mrs. Kapoor across the street, she swears by this one. It's called Shilajit. Harold stopped walking altogether. Shilajit. He said it like I'd just spoken another language. "Margaret, I'm not one of your book club projects." My breath caught, not in anger, not in offense, just that slow sinking of something inside me folding in on itself. "I didn't mean it like that," I whispered. He looked away. "Let it go." So I did. But that night, as he fell asleep facing the wall, just like he had every night for the past 2 years, I lay awake beside him, staring into the dark. I was still a woman. I was still breathing. And I was so very tired of pretending I wasn't here. I used to believe that love, once faded, could be stitched back together if I just held the thread tight enough. The gravel whispered beneath our feet as Harold and I walked through Zilker Park, just as we used to every Sunday before everything began to feel muted. It was a perfect afternoon by all appearances. Blue skies stretched wide and clear, the breeze soft and steady, children's laughter skipping over the grass like little birds in flight. But the quiet between us wasn't peaceful anymore. It was thick, like old wallpaper starting to peel, revealing something colder underneath. He walked with his hands folded behind his back, eyes forward. Not once did he look at me. I glanced sideways. "You know, Harold, the weather's just right, not too hot. Remember how we used to bring lemonade and sit by the fountain?" He nodded once, his eyes never leaving the trail. "That was a long time ago." I paused, then said gently, "Maybe we should try something new." That made him glance at me, just briefly. "New. There's this natural supplement I read about," I said, "from India. It's supposed to help with energy levels, vitality. A friend of mine swears it helped her husband feel more alive, more engaged." Harold stopped walking. The breeze seemed to hush around us. "You mean in the bedroom?" I blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness in his voice. No, I mean, not just that. I just thought it could be good for both of us, something small. His mouth tightened. Margaret, you've been reading too many of those articles. I let out a slow breath. Maybe. But can you honestly say we're fine like this? He looked at me then, really looked. And there it was, the sadness, not anger, not annoyance, just a dull ache behind his eyes. We've had a good life, he said quietly, but we can't chase what we used to be. He started walking again. I stood still for a moment, watching the curve of his shoulders, the way his shadow folded into the path all around us. The park pulsed with joy, couples laughed, hands interlaced. A teenage boy played catch with his dog, grinning as the animal bounded through the grass. The scent of barbecue floated through the air, rich and familiar, but all I could feel was the empty space beside me later that night, when he climbed into bed and turned away without a word. I stared at the ceiling, the sound of his breath even and distant. I reached for my phone in the dark, the glow harsh in my face. I typed the word slowly, Shilajit, and I ordered it. I didn't know what I expected, but I knew I couldn't keep waiting for something to change. Something had already changed. I just hadn't admitted it. The next morning, sunlight spilled gently across the kitchen counter, brushing against the rim of the glass mug I held in both hands. The Shilajit had arrived early, small, dark, and dense as guilt. I'd read the instructions twice before measuring out the thick, tar-like substance and stirring it into a cup of warm milk. It clung to the spoon like it didn't want to let go. Harold walked in, rubbing his eyes, the same plaid robe tied clumsily at his waist. "Morning," I said, trying to sound normal, trying not to shake. He grunted softly, sinking into the kitchen chair. I placed the mug in front of him. "Try this, it's got minerals good for circulation, might help with your joints." He raised an eyebrow, but took the cup anyway, one sip, and his face twisted. "What the hell is in this? Just try it for a few days," I said, avoiding his gaze. "Hurt, right?" He didn't argue, just drank, bitter swallow after bitter swallow. I watched him, too intently, as if the miracle would unfold instantly before me, his face, his breath, the way he stood when he got up, nothing. By noon, I told myself to stop staring. I folded towels, watered the plants, pretended to forget. But in the late afternoon, as the sun fell lazily across the living room, I caught him outside. He was mowing the lawn without being asked. I pressed a hand to the window, watching the lines he carved into the grass. His steps had a new steadiness, his shoulders a bit more upright. Sweat glistened on his temples. It was the most movement I'd seen from him in weeks. Something fluttered in my chest. Hope, maybe. Or something like it. Then I saw her across the street, the yoga girl. Her mat lay flat on the front lawn, the sunlight kissing her bare shoulders as she moved through a slow, deliberate stretch. Her body folded like silk, graceful and glowing. Harold slowed. His hands rested on the lawnmower's handle as his eyes lingered. A long moment, too long. I felt it first in my throat, a tightening, then in my stomach. A slow, heavy boil. He wasn't supposed to notice her. Not like that, not now. I stepped back from the window, my heart thudded, louder than it should, louder than any emotion I had allowed myself in years. I thought this was about reviving us, but maybe he wasn't broken. Maybe I was just no longer what he needed that night. I changed in the bathroom instead of the bedroom. He barely looked up from the television. I slipped into bed quietly, faced the other way. Sleep didn't come, only questions. What if this wasn't about lost youth, but lost desire? And what if no amount of herbs or hope could bring it back? The pillow beside me remained cold. I stared into the dark, not just wondering who Harold saw when he looked at her, but who he saw when he looked at me. The following day, I stood outside the small Indian herbal shop tucked between a laundromat and a tax service office. Its painted windows faded by years of Texas sun. The glass door creaked softly as I pushed it open, and a bell above chimed with surprising cheer. Inside, the air was thick with spice and warmth, cardamom, turmeric, something sweet I couldn't name. Shelves bowed under rows of glass jars and paper-labeled boxes. Everything about it felt ancient, fragrant, and oddly alive. Behind the counter stood a man, early 30s at most, with dusky skin and thick, dark hair pulled neatly back. His shirt was too tight around the arms, and when he looked up, his eyes dark, calm, aware, landed squarely on mine. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, voice low and rich, with an accent I couldn't place. "How may I help you?" I paused, my mouth dry, looking for something. "I think it's called Shilajit." A smile broke across his face, slow and confident. "Ah, the destroyer of weakness," he said, with a slight bow of his head. "You've done your research." He moved toward a shelf and retrieved a small, heavy jar, sealed in dark glass. "This is the purest we have, straight from the Himalayas." I took it carefully, feeling its weight in my palm. "So this is what all the fuss is about." He laughed gently. "Fuss or hope, depending who you ask." I tried not to look too long at his hands, or the way his shirt stretched at the shoulder when he moved, but my chest felt light, too light, like something inside me had lifted, just for a moment. "How do I use it?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "A pea-sized amount," he said, miming the shape with his fingers. "In warm milk or water once a day on an empty stomach." His gaze lingered, then flicked just briefly toward the ring on my finger. "It's for your husband, right?" I blinked, caught. Yes, yes, of course," he nodded, but the smile remained. "It works best when shared," he said. "Energy flows where attention goes." I wasn't sure what that meant, but I smiled anyway. As he rang up the purchase, I could feel the flush rising in my cheeks. I hated how obvious it must have looked, how long it had been since anyone made me feel noticed, even with something so small. He placed the jar in a brown paper bag and handed it to me, fingers brushing mine. "Come back if you have questions," he said. "We always remember the ones who do." Outside, the sun was sharp against my skin, but I hardly noticed. The bag crinkled lightly in my grip as I walked to the car, heart fluttering too fast for something so small, something so innocent. And yet, for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like just someone's wife. I felt visible. I stood at the window, arms folded, watching Harold lean against the fence. She was there again, the yoga girl from across the street. Her laugh carried on the breeze, soft and untroubled. Her long hair glowed in the afternoon light as she handed Harold a bottle of water. He chuckled, a sound I hadn't heard from him in weeks. I watched his posture shift, relaxed, open, the way he tilted his head toward her, like he was listening, like he cared. The tea kettle whistled behind me, but I didn't move. Instead, I turned away, chest tight, and stormed up the stairs. Each step felt louder than the last. I flung open the closet doors and stood there, staring at the rows of quiet clothes. So many things I hadn't worn in years, so many pieces of me left hanging in the dark. My fingers found the dress before I even knew what I was reaching for. It was deep burgundy, low neckline. The one I used to wear when we went dancing downtown, back when people looked. When he looked, I pulled it off the hanger, ran my fingers over the fabric. It smelled faintly of perfume and old memories. In the mirror, I hardly recognized the woman staring back. Gray at the roots, lines under her eyes, but something fierce flared in her expression. I brushed on mascara with a hand that trembled only slightly, added a touch of blush, lipstick in a shade I hadn't dared in years. Not for him, not today, for me. The heels clicked against the floor as I stepped into the hallway. My heart pounded like I was walking on stage. And maybe I was downstairs. The door was still open. I could hear her laugh again. And my jaw tightened. I opened the front door. Harold turned just in time to see me walk past. His eyes widened. He said something, but I didn't hear. Or maybe I didn't care to. I didn't stop, not for him, not for her. I walked straight down the sidewalk, each step a drumbeat of defiance. The heat clung to my skin, the pavement warm beneath my feet, but all I felt was that rush, that surge of something I thought I'd buried. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew exactly where I couldn't stay. 15 minutes later, I was standing once more outside the herbal shop. The windows caught the sun just right, and inside, I saw him, Arjun, behind the counter, arranging jars. He looked up and smiled, a slow, warm smile that didn't ask questions, that didn't measure time or guilt or years, just recognition. I opened the door, the bell chimed. My heels tapped across the floor. "Back so soon?" he asked, voice smooth, amused. "Just browsing," I replied, letting the air hang between us. He didn't move, neither did I. Something flickered behind his eyes, something unspoken. And I felt it again, that strange flutter rising in my chest, not shame, something wilder, warmer, something alive. The shop was quieter this time, no music playing, just the soft hum of an old ceiling fan, stirring the scent of cumin, and something floral in the still air. Arjun looked up from behind the counter, a teacup in one hand, and smiled like he'd been expecting me. "Margaret," he said, the syllables slow and warm. "Would you like something to drink?" I nodded. My voice felt like a fragile thing I didn't want to test yet. He motioned for me to sit at the small table tucked near the window. I slid into the chair, the dress fabric brushing my skin like a whisper. He poured steaming liquid into a tiny cup. The smell was earthy, soft, tinged with saffron, and something I couldn't place. "It's calming," he said, "but also awakening." I took a cautious sip. The taste was unfamiliar, grounding, a kind of quiet heat that spread from my tongue to my chest. Arjun sat across from me, arms resting on the table, his posture at ease. "You look different today," he said, not in the way men compliment to flatter, more like someone noticing a light had been turned on. I felt my cheeks flush. I needed to feel like myself again. "And do you?" he asked. I looked down at the tea, at the swirl of color circling the rim. "I think I'm remembering." We sat there, the space between us charged and soft at once, a strange comfort. I glanced at the jars lining the wall. I was curious. Is there something else for women? I mean, he leaned back slightly, then stood and reached toward a shelf. He returned with a small jar and placed it gently in front of me. "Ashwagandha," he said, "good for strength, balance, vitality." I ran a finger along the label, then looked up. "Strength," I repeated. "That's what I need. Not something to chase him, something to find me." He didn't speak, but his gaze lingered, not in judgment, not even desire, just awareness. There was silence, not awkward, not waiting, just full. Then, as if it had always been the most natural thing in the world, I leaned forward. "What would a private consultation entail?" I asked, voice quiet but clear. His smile didn't change, but his eyes did a flicker, a pause. "I suppose," he said, "it would depend on where it takes place." My fingers gripped the paper cup. "My home," I said, "tomorrow around 5. He nodded slowly. "I'll be finishing my shift then." I stood, feeling the weight of what I'd done settle over me, not like a stone, but like a veil being lifted. He followed me to the door. "See you tomorrow, Margaret," he said softly, outside. The sky was softening to gold. The air was thick, with coming dusk. Each step home felt impossibly light, and somehow heavier than anything I'd ever carried. The door closed behind us with a soft click. For a moment, neither of us moved. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the walls seemed to be holding their breath. I led him through the narrow hallway, past framed photos of a younger me smiling, arms wrapped around Harold at barbecues, birthdays, quiet Christmas mornings. Arjun's steps were measured behind mine, respectful, steady. When we reached the bedroom, I paused at the threshold. It was the same room I'd slept in for over 40 years, the same sheets, the same creak in the floorboard near the closet. But tonight, it felt different, like I'd slipped into a dream I wasn't supposed to be having. I turned to face him. His eyes searched mine, not with hunger, but with something slower, deeper. He didn't reach for me. He just waited. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded, not because I was sure of anything, but because I needed to feel something that didn't ache. What followed wasn't about skin or heat. It was about gravity shifting, like I had stepped outside myself and returned through a door I didn't know had been locked. His presence was like water moving through a dry garden, not forceful, just inevitable. Every gesture carried the weight of silence, the rhythm of breath, the echo of things neither of us said aloud. And when his hands neared mine, it felt like the world tipped slightly, just enough to remind me I was still part of it. There were no explosions, no grand declarations, just the sound of breath becoming shared, the slow undoing of years, the lightness of being seen fully, without apology. At one point, I closed my eyes and I let go of shame, of fear, of the version of me that had waited too long. After, we lay in the hush of the dimming room, my head on his chest, his fingers tracing quiet circles along the space between us. I should have felt guilt. Instead, I felt something quieter, a kind of peace that I hadn't known I was missing. He turned to me, voice low. "Margaret, I love you." My body tensed. "What?" "Serious," he said, eyes meeting mine. "I want to marry you." I sat up, heart pounding. The words hung in the air like a rope pulled too tight. Then came the crashing wave of stories, of warnings, of women like me being used, tricked. My voice was barely more than a whisper. "You want a green card, don't you?" His expression didn't shift, not right away. "Margaret," he began, "get out." It came sharper than I intended. He hesitated. I didn't repeat myself. He stood, gathering his things slowly, not out of shame, but with that same unreadable calm he always carried. And then he was gone. The door closed behind him with the same soft click. But now, the silence rang louder than anything he'd said. The morning after, the bed beside me was cold. Not because Harold hadn't returned to it, he had. Sometime after the silence reclaimed the house. But because it no longer held meaning. Not for him, not for me. I lay still, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling, wondering if they'd always been there, or if I'd simply learned to stop looking. Downstairs, the clatter of dishes, the faint creak of the fridge door, normal sounds, ordinary movements. But they felt like echoes inside a house that no longer knew how to speak. When I walked into the kitchen, Harold looked up from his cereal, just briefly, no words, not even a nod. As if yesterday, and everything it meant, had been erased. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat across from him, let the silence settle between us like dust. He flipped the page of the newspaper. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, voice neutral. "Fine," I said. Neither of us mentioned the smell of saffron that still lingered faintly on my sheets. I stood, rinsed my mug, and moved to the garden. The backyard had gone wild, vines curling where they shouldn't, petunias overgrown, the earth cracked and dry. I knelt and pressed my hands into the soil. It gave way too easily, like something forgotten finally softening to touch. I pulled weeds in silence, trimmed the roses, watered the thirsty ground. And in that simple motion, in that quiet labor, I felt a stillness return, not peace, not forgiveness, but clarity. Harold came to the doorway at one point, watching. "Garden looks good," he said. I didn't answer. I just kept digging. That evening, I sat alone in the living room, the house dim but warm, a book open on my lap, though I wasn't reading, just listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of the blinds, the low murmur of Harold's television upstairs. For once, I wasn't waiting for him to join me. I wasn't waiting for anyone. I walked to my desk, opened the drawer, pulled out the notepad I hadn't used since the year we retired. The pen trembled slightly in my hand as I wrote not a letter to him, not a confession, just truth. "I am still here," I wrote, "and I am not done." The ink soaked into the paper, curling slightly at the corners. I folded the note and slipped it into the back of a book I might never lend. And then I made myself a cup of tea, no herbs, no promises, just black, strong, bitter, real. It had been 2 weeks since Arjun left. No calls, no visits, just silence, like a chapter torn clean from a book and never read aloud again. Harold never asked, not directly, but I could feel it in the way he watched me sometimes, quietly, as if unsure whether to speak or stay silent. One evening, as I folded laundry in the dim light of our bedroom, he stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea. He offered one without a word. I took it. We sat on opposite sides of the bed. The air between us felt thinner somehow, less like a barrier, more like a space waiting to be filled. "I saw you walking with him," Harold said after a long pause, "that day. I didn't look at him." "I know," he nodded slowly, "and I didn't stop you." "I know." Another silence. He cleared his throat, voice thick. "I didn't know how to fight for you anymore. I thought maybe you didn't want to be fought for." I looked down at the steam curling from my cup. "I didn't want to fight, Harold. I wanted a pulse." He winced slightly, but didn't interrupt. "I wanted to feel seen," I said, "wanted to believe that desire didn't end just because years passed. That love didn't mean just coexisting." He nodded again. A slow, painful movement. "I forgot how to look at you. And I forgot how to ask." We sat like that until the tea grew cold in our hands, not touching, not blaming, just 2 people sitting inside the ruins of a house they'd built together, wondering if the foundation could still be salvaged. The next morning, I walked to the shop. It was closed. A handwritten note taped to the window read, "Back in India. Family emergency. Thank you for your kindness, Arjun." No return date. I stood there for a long while, reading those words again and again, as if they would change shape, as if they might offer something more than goodbye. But they didn't. That night, I opened the jar of ashwagandha, measured out a small spoonful, brewed it into a simple tea, and I drank it alone, not for beauty, not for longing, not for anyone else, but for strength, because sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is choose herself. It started with little things, a new mug in the cupboard, one ID picked out just for me, bright yellow, with a chipped rim that somehow made it feel more mine. Then a book I hadn't let myself read for years, poetry, the kind that didn't rush toward resolution, that sat in pain and didn't apologize for it. I stopped cooking dinner every night, not out of spite, just to see what happened. Sometimes Harold cooked, sometimes we ordered in, sometimes we ate separately. No one starved. One afternoon, while clearing out the garage, I found my old easel covered in dust, half the screws loose, but it still stood. I brought it inside, set it by the window, where the light came soft and golden in the late hours. I hadn't painted since, before the kids left home, before the routines hardened into rituals. But that night, I opened a box of paints, fingers trembling like they did the first time I held a brush. The canvas stayed blank for a while, just breath and waiting. Then a line, then a color. I didn't know what I was painting, only that it wasn't about anyone else. Harold passed behind me once, paused. "You're painting again." I nodded, didn't stop. He didn't say more, but he didn't walk away either. At night, we talked sometimes, not about what had happened, but about memories, about music, about what the kids were up to, small things, gentle things, like rebuilding a bridge one plank at a time, never sure if it would reach the other side. And slowly, we began walking again through the neighborhood, past the park, side by side, not hand in hand, but not in silence. He pointed to a tree once, the one we used to sit beneath in our 30s. "Remember that squirrel that stole your sandwich?" I laughed. "I still think you trained him," he smiled. "Maybe I did." We kept walking. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was disappearing. I didn't feel invisible. I felt present, no longer asking for permission to be alive, just being. Spring came late that year. The trees outside our window, once bare and aching, began to blush green again. Tiny leaves unfurled like careful promises, unsure but brave. I found myself waking earlier, not out of habit or duty, but because I wanted to sit with the morning light, to sip my tea slowly, to listen to the hum of the world before it asked anything of me. Harold joined me one morning. No words at first, just silence and shared breath. Then he reached for my hand. It wasn't dramatic. No music swelled in the background, no grand apology, just a hand, worn and warm, finding its way back to mine. I didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long while, letting the sun rise over the garden, where small shoots of green pushed their way through the soil I'd turned weeks ago. That afternoon, I painted again. Only this time, the strokes were bold, confident. The colors weren't careful anymore. Harold peeked over my shoulder. "What is it?" he asked. I tilted my head, smiled faintly. It's not done yet. He nodded, like us. I looked at him, the man I had shared a lifetime with, the man who had disappointed me, the man I had hurt, the man who, somehow, still showed up each day, even if it was only in quiet ways. I'm not going anywhere, he said. And for once, I believed him that night as we washed the dishes side by side. Something in the rhythm felt familiar, not like a return to the past, but like learning a new song that shared an old melody. I didn't need passion that burned the house down. I didn't need grand gestures or promises carved in stone. I needed space to grow, to breathe, to be. And somehow, in the quiet after the storm, I had found it not in another man, not in a miracle cure, but in the slow, trembling choice to love myself again and to let life begin not over, but honest.